Wall Street Journal published Why Israel Must Take Rafah, the literal day of the invasion of Rafah. That is genocidal. 600,000 children in Rafah. The majority of Palestinians have been displaced for the last 7 months. They've lost their homes. They're living in tents. They're being bombed in tents while they're starving. They lack medical supplies. They lack clean water. They lack food. They lack sanitation. Meanwhile, Anthony Blinken told us when he was in his little panel, the biggest change that I've seen in these last decades is where people get their information. There was a time when you used to just pick up a print copy of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and that's where you got your information. But now people are seeing images of suffering. Palestinians are showing you about what they're actually going through, the slaughter that they are enduring day in and day out. In the last month, we've discovered at least 2 mass graves where there's literally been hundreds of Palestinians who have been killed, buried alive. Many of the Palestinians were patients that were executed in their hospital beds. Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you're worried about showing the college kids that the power comes at the barrel of a gun, and then you ended up doing exactly that.
Please like, comment, and subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. You can also find us on Patreon, where you can get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes and an additional podcast called the Patreon Pod. It's a little more laid back. We talk politics, Palestine, pop culture, and get a little more personal. We're also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So really exciting stuff. Check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod. So before we get into today's episode, which was recorded with Dr. Jill Stein, presidential candidate for the Green Party, we would love to play a clip for you of Michael interviewing some students from UCLA right after they were attacked by Zionist mobs at the UCLA Gaza Solidarity encampment and before the police came to tear down and terrorize their encampment.
So I'm here at UCLA's campus with volunteer Kai, who has responded to the call to come and support the encampment at UCLA. What brings you here and what is your involvement in this volunteer effort?
Yes, I am a graduate student at UCLA, and what brings me here is that we've been seeing on the news for the past 6 months that a genocide is being carried out in Palestine, and it is painful to wake up every morning to see, this just devastating videos of, streets that are streaming with blood and people, parents having to pick up their children in a plastic bag. Like it's the most revolting thing. And what brings us here is that we want to see this come to an end. We know that our university is playing a part actively investing in companies that profit and enable this genocide. And so we are here to support the students who have been encamping for the past 7 days to call on the university to divest from companies that profit from genocide, to disclose their divestments, to cut off ties with Israeli institutions, and call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire.
Fantastic. I can tell you've done a couple interviews today. Were you around during the Zionist attack on peaceful protesters last night?
I wasn't at the front lines, but I was running around and helping out. And it was horrific to see that this kind of unprecedented level literal terrorism is happening on our campus. And it was devastating to see, that many of my friends were injured. Many of my friends were pepper sprayed. Some of them had to be taken to the hospital. It's the most disgusting thing. And most disgusting of it all is how the university claims that it's for student safety. And yet, when it comes to the time when actual Zionist terrorists are threatening the safety of students on campus, they've decided to actively make a choice, sit back, and do nothing. And I really feel like this is reflective both the violence of the Zionist terrorizers and the way that the university is actively complicit. The way they endorse this violence against its pro-Palestinian voices are exactly reflective of the same way that the Israeli state is oppressing the people of Palestine, and the same way that the UC tacitly approves of this genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about the police presence here right now in comparison to when the Zionists attacked? It looked as though there was no police presence. Can you talk about the police lack of protection of student protesters during that time?
I mean, we know that the police are not here to protect us. We know that the police is here to enforce the interests and to protect the interests of the university's rich investments.
Absolutely.
And so, it's not at all surprising, only disappointing and disgusting that when its students, when a university that claims to be premier in the world, when its students are in danger, the university makes no effort to protect its students and instead brings out police only to shut down the student movement and to continue to enforce and enable genocide.
You hear a lot about, how people are feeling unsafe on campuses. Do you feel safe on this campus?
Frankly, I do not. But the one and only and the persistent reason that I do not feel safe on this campus is because of the Zionist aggressors. Many of these people from last night, for example, they are not UC students. The vast majority of them were outsiders. Many of them we know are ex Israeli occupation forces. So they're coming in with really military oppressive tactics that they are using on Gazans right now. Things like throwing bombs, things like tear gassing and bear spraying and pepper spraying. All of these strategies, this is it's terrifying. I mean, honestly, I know, and I think everybody who comes to the encampment knows that we are putting our lives at risk. My mom has been staying with me, and every day when I come to the encampment, my mom is basically pleading me to not come because she thinks that I'm going to die, and this is the way that the university treats us. They would rather see us die than divest, but we are here strong, and we are not going to back down until we get our demands from the university to divest.
Amazing. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want to share that as much as all this turmoil on campus is happening, our focus is on Gaza. All of the violence, all of the terrorism that we face, it is nothing compared to the violence faced by Gazans and Palestinians every single day, and they have been facing the same thing for the past 75 years of Israeli occupation.
Well said. Thank you so much, Kai.
That's amazing. He wasn't obviously he wasn't Palestinian. Was he Jewish or not? Not at all. No, okay.
No, so he wasn't Palestinian, he wasn't Jewish. And then there's another one. Listen to another voice
Got it.
memo.
Pulling it up.
This one is
That
from
was incredible, by the way. That was really incredible.
Yes,
So
I
the
mean,
students are so well spoken. And it's again just a massive manipulation of the mainstream media when they tell you these students don't know what they're talking about. They're kids, they're idiots, they're confused, they're no, they listen to their interviews, listen to them talk. They're incredibly well spoken. They know their facts. They understand where the money is going. They understand that it's literally producing extremely lethal effects on families. They are not accepting of that, and they are doing what they can to change that reality. And it is so clear. It's so clear and you have to intentionally want to mislead in order to act confused about what's going on.
In the encampment in UCLA, there was a central area outside of the Fowler Museum and a few other buildings in the quad, in the square. That was where the main encampment was. They had fortified that right after the Zionist attack. And so I interviewed them in between when they were attacked by Zionists out of uniform. And then later that night, they would be attacked by the police Zionists in uniform.
Yes.
Right. And so Kai was a volunteer who was working on the outside of the encampment where there was a protest happening in support of the encampment, right? Because the encampment had one entrance, one exit area, and that was at the stairwell, which I would eventually go up and inside. And so, yes, Kai was responding to the call to volunteer on the protest outside of the encampment. Now, the next person that you're about to hear is a member of the security team who was a part of the encampment inside. So this is up the entrance. He saw the Zionist attack firsthand.
Got it.
And organizer and student at UCLA, Ismail. Thank you so much for your time, Ismail. Talk me through what you've seen through the last 24 hours.
Last 24 hours have been pretty much a high point for our encampment here. It's been going on for 7 days now. Yesterday, we were met with an unprecedented attack on our peaceful protesters with immense violence. I myself was pepper sprayed point blank, shot tear gas at, projectiles thrown at, ended up in the ER last night, came back after a few hours. The entire time we were peaceful protesting, barricading off the aggression from the pro-Israel counter protesters. Started off with some loud noises and speaker systems playing gunshots, sirens, babies crying, which then escalated to 5 or 10 masked men.
I'm sorry, the baby's crying. I had to pause it because that's literally what they're doing in Gaza.
Yes, they're mirroring the same tactics against college students. Babies crying, gunshots.
It is literally happening in real time. The phenomenon that we are talking about, that what happens in Gaza won't stay there, is happening in real time, people. It is not going to show up in 20 or 30 years. It is happening today at the exact same time. We posted weeks ago that they were using quadcopters and drones that had audio of babies crying, luring Palestinian families out of their homes and tents so that they could see what was going on, and then sniping them to death. And that was just the news of the day, one of the 400 bits of information that was covered up the very next day. Oh my God. Let's keep going.
And wearing a Michael Myers-like Halloween mask. They came in. Me being part of the security committee went up to go see what the commotion was about. And within 30 seconds, I was sprayed point blank with some type of mace spear spray. I had medics from our peaceful protesting side come and help me out, wash out my eyes. And while I was still struggling to see from the blurry vision, I noticed and heard loud noises, which ended up being fireworks shot at us. This flashes of yellow and green and red going on through my blurred vision. Immediately, we took cover. We used tents. We used umbrellas. We used wood planks to block ourselves in order to have cover from them. Since then, it was a long night, a lot of aggression. Police came and watched. Eventually, they dispersed after about 5-6 hours. From that, 6 a.m. to this morning to now has been rebuilding. We've been notified that LAPD is coming to disperse us based on the fact that we are an unlawful assembly, which is not true because all we're doing is peacefully protesting. We're getting ready to meet with them and see what we decide to do and resist.
And what is your connection to Palestine?
I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Arab. I don't have any family that's Palestinian or Arab. I'm a human who's against genocide.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Anything else that you want to share with the people?
Free Palestine.
Thanks so much.
Those are incredible interviews, Michael. Incredible. Thank you so much for doing that. That's amazing.
Thanks. I'll probably include that on the pod.
Yeah, I think you should.
And thanks to the college kids who are, rising up all over the country. I was just able to visit one campus and talk to a few students, but the kids know what's going on, and it's a distortion by the media to say that they are confused because they have such moral clarity that it looks like confusion to somebody whose entire life is based on money.
And now, without further ado, our interview with Dr. Stein.
It's just the threat. All you had to do was threaten the machine here.
That's right, truly.
Like
and I feel like that's a
have
great
to-
way to introduce you. You are such a threat to the two-party system, the duopoly that controls the lives of so many Americans and also people all over the world. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Jill Stein, presidential candidate for the United States.
Thank you so much, Palestine Pod. It's really such an honor to be with you, and thank you for all your wonderful work.
Oh, thank you. I've been a fan for a long time. I actually have the honor and pleasure of having voted for you in 2012.
A true badge of honor.
A longtime supporter. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Great to see you today, truly.
Likewise.
So, and also my conscience is clear insofar as I've participated in the sham that is U.S. politics.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'm very happy to be a vehicle for rebels across the board in all time to fight back and dismantle empire and oligarchy. We have a big job to do. So thanks for being there from the start.
You literally said one sentence, dismantle empire and oligarchy. And I'm like, I'm on board,
Yeah.
I'm just so on board. It's so refreshing to hear somebody who is wanting to participate in government for the right reason.
That's why I turned my life upside down to do this, realizing that everything else we're trying to do is kind of for naught unless we also go to the center of power and force it to change. And I think there are lots of us. There are actually lots of us. It's just that the system is so expert at making people feel powerless and hopeless, and it relies on that. But it's an illusion. It's an absolute illusion. We do have the power. And, it's kind of taken 2012, till now. So it was like 12 years of intensive study, learning in action to understand how to really fight the system. And it goes back way before then, but it was in 2012 that I really began sort of the fight at this level of presidential politics. And it is smoke and mirrors, and it's really just a matter of learning how to play the game, and then, having the courage of our convictions. And that is just happening now in boatloads, from Gaza to campuses around the world. Courage is on the loose, and it's such a powerful transformative moment. So
let's get right into the issues. In 2012, when you ran for office, then, according to Wikipedia, which you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, you received roughly 470,000 votes. In 2016, when you ran for office, you received 1.45 million votes, or 1% of the popular vote. Things have changed tremendously since 2016. And it's not only the genocide that's happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza and also creeping into the occupied West Bank, but things in general are not going well in the US, domestically or internationally. Let's start, though, with Gaza and give us your feelings on what you've been seeing for the last 7 months, and in particular, commenting on the US's role in perpetuating the genocide, and just let us know how you feel that is really going to impact what's going to happen come November.
So, Gaza and genocide are the moral imperative of the moment. And it is a wake-up call to anyone who's not brain dead and who's not heart dead, and whose soul is not dead. This is kind of a big wake-up call right now that, not only are 2 million lives on the line at this moment, but that this is really a symbol of what's wrong with empire. What's going on in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. This is about the torture and murder of children on an industrial scale. This is about the dismantling of international law and human rights. And we are making decisions right now about what the future looks like for all of us. I'm coming to this, as a mother, experiencing above all just the shock and horror of watching what's being done to children in particular, but everybody else as well. I saw a statistic today that, and this is from UNRWA, that 37 children are rendered motherless every day in Gaza. That's just one particular slice of this, one of just a gazillion statistics that all, just turn your stomach. So I'm kind of responding in the gut way that any mother or father or sister or brother, any human being would respond. So that's like a big part of it for me. And it was intolerable from the start to not go all out to fight this, because it's just so distressing to witness. And to me, it's less distressing if you're fully engaged in fighting it. And I don't know how people can close their eyes to this. I was raised, as a Jew following the Holocaust. I was born in 1950. So, shortly after the war, the Second World War ended, and the Jewish community was in absolute shock, from the genocide. My grandparents were refugees from pogroms. it was very much a part of my upbringing in a Jewish community, going to a Reform synagogue once every week. I was going to so-called Sunday school for, I think, the first 15 years of my life, if I'm not mistaken, just kind of imbued in more Jewish culture than anything else, like music and singing in the children's choir. And, the culture of Israel surrounded me, but it wasn't like sort of rabid Zionism. It was just kind of implicit Zionism. But the biggest thing, that was really drilled into me was that genocide should never happen again, not to anyone, and that was a core Jewish value. Those responsible for genocide are not only those who commit genocide, but those who are bystanders to genocide. And so that was kind of like my DNA became social activism. I was just raised to do that. And that's just kind of been something I could not refrain from doing. And so, to see an actual genocide rolling out in front of our eyes, it just became for me such a mission to center this, and why I felt compelled to do this. I had stepped into the race actually not by intent, but because the party's ballot line suddenly got vacated when Dr. West decided that he would prefer to go solo, which I completely understand. When you kind of make these decisions on the fly in the heat of the moment, we would provide a vehicle and a platform for him. It's always a calculated risk. So it wasn't surprising. It's very hard to learn how to work with a small party on the fly while you're running a high-pressured campaign. I think when you run in the big parties, it's like a campaign in the box, and everything is done for you. You have your database, you have your staff who they deliver to you, who are trained. You have your agenda, which is the party agenda. So it's like a campaign in a box. It's not that way with a small party. We don't have the resources to do that. So you have to really know the party in order to work productively with it. I was tricked into running for office for the first time in the year 2002. And it took me several races to figure out how to work with the party in a productive way. So I completely understand why this was very challenging for Dr. West and why he went his own way. But when he did, we had something like 3 weeks to come up with a campaign, or we were going to start losing our ballot lines, which are invaluable. I mean, that is basically what we have gained from 2 decades or so of running campaigns. We have ballot lines, we have people who know how to safeguard them and watchdog them and renew them when we lose them, because it's a very dynamic process. But we had 3 weeks, or we were going to miss California. And if you miss California, it's going to cost you $5 million, maybe 3, but a huge amount of money if you don't catch those ballot lines.
Can you explain what you mean by it's going to cost people $5 million?
If you have a ballot line already, you don't have to pay anything for it. If you're first going to gain a ballot line in a state like New York, New York also, but California, it's, I think, a couple 100,000 signatures that you have to gather. And that's a very expensive process. Even if you're doing it with volunteers have to be managed. The whole thing has to be coordinated. And you could never do hundreds of thousands of signatures all with volunteers. You have to have professional collectors. And, that's what most campaigns do, which is why once you get a ballot line, it's invaluable to keep it. And you keep it by attaining a certain percentage in the elections, in the votes. And we've been able to do that in California and in Texas and in Florida. These are the big, super expensive states. There's, one big one that we're working on right now, which is New York, where they raised the requirement, they tripled it. So we have to basically gather 45,000 so-called valid signatures. Valid means it matches the voter registration of the signer. And this is used as an opportunity by Democrats to throw us off the ballot. They're forever looking at, oh, you just put a middle initial instead of your full middle name. Therefore, invalid signature. And the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, announced that they had hired an army of lawyers to try to nitpick us off the ballot everywhere possible, because heaven forbid they should actually have to stand on the issues and, defend themselves for what their agenda and their record is. They could never do that. So they have to disqualify their their competitors. So at any rate, with like 3 weeks to get on California, it was going to be either myself or Ajamu Baraka. We slugged it out for weeks, as long as we possibly could. And he won the fight, basically. So I had to step up. And, shortly after that, the assault on Gaza launched. There would be a campaign that would be on the ballot across the country, and that we could center this fight, and we could make the election a referendum on genocide, which the American people already oppose. And so it just became invaluable to me to be a part of that and to be a megaphone for this battle and to empower this battle as a full-blown fight against empire across the country, on the ballot, in every state, so that we can't be written off as just a voice in the wilderness or just a symbolic campaign. We are launching a real challenge to empire. So, that feels so critical. On the other point I was going to make, an answer to your question about, personally, where am I coming from? I'm also coming to this as a healthcare provider and a doctor, knowing that basically common sense, but also 8 years of medical training, and then decades of practice to know that you cannot deprive an entire population of food, water, shelter, sanitation, and bomb them and herd them like cattle from one refuge to another and then bomb the refuges. This is just like a death watch. We're on a death watch for 2 million people. And that's just in my bones, seeing that it's miraculous from hour to hour that a massive epidemic hasn't broken out yet and, slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. They could all go, they could all go down really fast here. And
that's what one of the Israeli officials said. He said, let disease spread. He said that we can use it as a tactic, right?
yes.
They're very open about their genocidal intent. They have been every single day for the last 7 months. I just want to go back really quickly to something you said about Democrats can't debate you on the issues. I was on George Galloway and I told him that every time there's an election in the US, you're never told why you have to vote for Democrats. You're just told that you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. That's it. That's all you're ever told. You on the substance, if you have a bone to pick on anything related to the substance, they just tell you, no, it doesn't matter. You have to vote for the lesser of two evils. It always comes down to that. So maybe you could share just a little bit about why now is the time to end voting on the basis of lesser of two evils.
Sure. I think where we are is kind of the culmination of this lesser evilism. Lesser evil is still evil. And when you actually dig below the headlines, we've got two greater evil candidates and two greater evil parties who are basically sponsored by Wall Street, war machine, war profiteers, AIPAC, health insurance companies, big pharma, big real estate, fossil fuels, you name it. It's like all the problems that we have are very bought in. And this is the problem of the American political system. It's the best democracy money can buy, which is no democracy at all. It's basically a system in service of those who are in power. So we see oligarchy get richer by the day, and we see these unprecedented extremes of wealth that just get more and more extreme, because once you're in that position, you can buy more policy. And that's how policy works. It basically serves the big campaign donors and lobbyists. So we've kind of reached the logical conclusion of this system. It's inherently genocidal. It's inherently a war machine. It's inherently an exercise of Wall Street power, and they're all like interconnected like this. So this isn't going to be fixed around the margins, and we kind of have to stand up and really change the system because our lives depend on it. This isn't just a matter of doing the right thing. It's like the system is so dysfunctional now, whether it's, a major crash of the economy, which keeps crashing and hasn't recovered for everyday working people. It's doing fine if you're in the top 10 or 15%, you're doing great, but it's really a struggle for everybody else. Half of people who rent their housing now are horribly challenged just trying to keep a roof over their heads, paying more than 30% of their income, which doesn't leave much for everything else. Then, you have huge numbers of people, like 87 million, who do not have adequate health insurance. Poverty, child poverty has doubled. Homelessness is at, record highs. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So the economy is not working. It is either crashing or on the verge of crashing for most people who feel it. regardless of the propaganda about Bidenomics, the economic system is definitely not working. And the jobs that people have are really abusive and, really hard to live with. And you're working crazy schedules and just destroys your family life and mental health and all that. So the economy is devastating.
Can you imagine kids who were already living in their car willing to set up tents on their college campus?
Absolutely. Yes.
It's like, wow,
And
what a stretch. They were like, it's actually more spacious in here.
yeah, you're not kidding. And it speaks
No, I'm not. I mean, I am kidding. That's a joke, but also it's true about a lot of the kids at UC Humboldt.
I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's well beyond UC Humboldt as well, because lots of students are really, taking it on the chin right now economically, and then it's also like, where do you go if you're a member of the younger generation? You got a lot of student debt and you don't have jobs really to help you get out of that debt. You have the climate, which is crashing in on you. Half of people under age 25, according to polls, describe themselves as hopeless about the future. 1 out of every 4 has contemplated harming themselves within the last 2 weeks of the poll. So what does this say? This says that we are in a world that is crashing and burning right now. And, empire is part of that. We're spending half of our budget, half of our congressional dollars are being spent now on the endless war machine. So of course there's not enough money, or so they say. There's enough money to throw more weapons into genocide. Like Dwight Eisenhower said, it will take on a life of its own, and it has taken on a life of its own. And it is the prime directive now, thou shalt go to war endlessly and allow millions of people to die, while we here at home are being impoverished by that, and we're being endangered by it too, because these wars inevitably lead to potential nuclear conflicts, and they tend to generalize. And that's exactly what's happening right now around Gaza, where the US and Israel are in active conflicts now with the 4 or 5 countries, including Iran, which Israel, in all of its wisdom, attacked, their embassy in Syria. And it's kind of miraculous that didn't explode into some massive conflict. But you have Iran networked with Russia. So there could be, a third nuclear nation brought into this, in addition to Israel and the US. So this is unbelievably
really
crazy.
quickly. Also, the Zionist attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria is only the latest of many aggressions against Iran. They killed, with the help of the United States, General Soleimani as well. Like, there's been a number of spy efforts uncovered inside of Iran as well. So and they also have killed many nuclear scientists over the course of the last 12 years. So it's a prolonged aggression against Iran.
Exactly. And, Bibi Netanyahu, this would be, his wish fulfillment to drag the US into this war, into a war with Iran, because he needs to distract from the genocide, because the world doesn't like this genocide and is really horrified by it. So this is just a disaster scenario on every front. So this is why, this is a perfect storm for political change, right? Why is it now? It's now because empire and oligarchy are crashing and burning, and we face crisis. The American people, beyond America as well, but just looking at us in this election, the American people face crisis in really every dimension of our lives: our healthcare, our housing, our health. In addition to our healthcare, our health is pretty miserable in this country, probably the worst among developed nations. Student debt. Our education system is falling apart. What is not falling apart? There's almost nothing that's not falling apart here in our lives. Our mental health, the opioid crisis, fascism right now, which we've seen really displayed on our campuses across the country. The violence here, the riot was brought by the riot police with the help of the Zionist mobs, were assisted by the Proud Boys, at least in University of Southern California,
and coordinated with the police as well,
who in turn are coordinated with the IDF, now the IOF. But yes, there is Israel.
Yeah. So the college kids were actually attacked by Zionists outside of uniform at first, and then Zionists in uniform later.
It's really true. What's wrong with this picture? This picture is not survivable, and the American people, are widely waking up to that fact. And there is really kind of a very active competition going on right now. Are people going to believe their own lying eyes, or are they going to believe the propaganda campaigns, which we've heard before and again and again and again? Thou shalt vote for the lesser evil. Do not vote for yourself. Do not vote for your future. Do not vote for a job or healthcare or peace and stability in the world, or a climate that could survive and give us a fighting chance into the future. Which is it going to be? Are we going to be good little boys and girls and take our marching orders from the economic and political elites? That's what they would like us to think. But, look at what happened in New York State in their Democratic Party primary 3 or 4 weeks ago. There was 12% uncommitted, which was a huge achievement. But there was also 83% who voted with their feet and did not come out. So the vote actually dropped between the 2020 Democratic primary and the 2024 Democratic primary. Same candidate had already been coronated in both of those primaries. But the difference is people were bought in and identified with and connected with the Democratic Party in 2020. They don't anymore. So the party's in a panic here for very good reasons. They should be in a panic, but I don't think there's any hope for them actually, except to keep us off the ballot. And that's why I want to appeal to anybody right now who's in New York or is a neighbor of New York who can come and help carry signatures with our team. And you can go to jillstein2024.com and sign up, and we will partner with you. And this is a empowering exercise in democracy and justice. And our central cause, is to ensure that stopping genocide is going to be on the ballot, fully contesting for power with empire across the country. New York is kind of the last stand of the empire. This is where they are trying to shut us down. And it's very exciting to see the number of people now who are mobilizing. If you're in a position to contribute, people can do that at the same website, jillstein2024.com. If you can't get there to help, your dollars can help in a very big way. Our future is playing out right now, and we have an opportunity to really challenge empire and to shut down genocide.
What do you say to people who are just growing increasingly distrustful of electoral politics as a vehicle for change?
Yeah. So, I totally relate to that myself. I grew up in the Vietnam War, or fighting the Vietnam War. And I, certainly did not trust the political system whatsoever until I discovered Ralph Nader in 2000. At the tender young age of 50, I was persuaded to get involved with a political campaign for the first time. It took 50 years for me to find that there is a fight. There is a fight that's of, by, and for the people. We must not step back from the fight in the streets and the encampments and all the social engines of change. They're absolutely critical. They are the foremost act of change. But if that's all we do, it's kind of for naught. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. If we don't bring that demand into the halls of power through the voting booth, through elections, we will continue to be sidelined, and we will get more of where we're going. So I really encourage people, stay the course, to keep up the fight in the streets, in the encampments, all that. We have to do that. But we can't give them a pass in the voting booth. Carrying a petition to get on the ballot is just a simple part of that. This ensures that we have power in the voting booth. Otherwise, we don't have a chance, because the system is extremely biased against us. And, I would urge people to check out any candidate. Don't take any candidate's word for it. You have to really check out what is their record, who's working with them. They are untrustworthy until proven otherwise. But I am very confident that people will find the track record and the actions of my campaign, but also the Green Party. We are, we've been vilified forever because we hold the line and we stand for the right stuff, and we don't take money from corporate PACs. We disavow super PACs, which a candidate can't control, but candidate can say, get the hell out of here, and we want nothing to do with you, etc. So we do not work with super PACs, unlike RFK. who is counting on a super PAC to get him on the ballot. So we don't have anything to do with super PACs or with big money, and we don't use any of the legal schemes that Democrats and Republicans use, whereby a single donor can write a check for $600,000 and it will launder its way back to that campaign. We don't do that. We don't participate in lawyerly stuff. We don't lawyer up. We have defensive lawyers because we need it. We're under attack constantly. So, thank God we have some principled attorneys who advise us on how to fight back. But we're not doing, the dirty tricks to try to bring in big money, because the minute you bring in big money, it's hard. It's a temptation that just draws people in, and people get sucked into trying to please their donors. So
as opposed to their constituents, which is why the majority of Democrats have for months now been saying that they want to see a ceasefire in Gaza, a permanent ceasefire, and yet the Biden administration has done absolutely everything to undermine and to sabotage a ceasefire in Gaza, despite the UN Security Council resolution that finally did pass that ordered a ceasefire for at least until the end of Ramadan, which was totally ignored despite the ICJ order on provisional measures, and then the second order on provisional measures, which was rendered in March after the first one was rendered in January. And then recently, when Biden was asked, are the student protests going to change policy? He said no. Right. So the question then is, if he's not responding or respecting the views of the people who voted for him, what we actually have in the United States is not, it's not a democracy. It's not even a republic where you vote for a person and then that person represents, the views and the beliefs that they said that they would abide by, or that the majority of the people that have voted for him believe in. And that brings us to what Michael and I were talking about just before you joined us, which was the recent clip. And
we live in a fascist theocracy.
I'm sure you've seen it, of Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken having a little, conversation at some John McCain Institute, which I did not even know was a thing. And Mitt Romney says, what went wrong? The Israelis are usually so good at PR. And very candidly, Anthony Blinken said to him, well, the single biggest change that I have seen in the last few decades is in the way that we obtain information. Before, you used to go outside every morning and pick up your paper copy of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and that is the only place you would get your information. Whereas today, everybody has information accessible to them at all times from their smartphones. He said we are on a, quote, intravenous drip of, nonstop information, and people are seeing images of suffering, which is resonating with them, and that is real. And so Michael and I were saying and there's so much to comment about in this exchange, but one of the really illuminating things is that our leaders seem to be more perplexed and more bothered by the fact that the American people are witnessing the scenes of their funded genocide and their arms, their American weapons, killing Palestinian children and Palestinian families, than they are by the fact that this is taking place in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's bothering them that we're seeing it. They don't believe we should see it. They believe that instead we should just read policy pieces and have no photos, no testimonies, don't ever hear from a Palestinian. And in fact, at one point, even Mitt Romney says, if you look on TikTok, they mention Palestinians a lot more than the other social media sites. So that's definitely why the president's going to have to do something about that, which of course undermines the entire reason why the government has told us they're pursuing a TikTok ban in the first place, which is allegedly about Chinese influence, which of course we know that's not what it's about.
They just handed the lawyers in that case a slam dunk.
Yeah. Really great. Social media has the power to change things, despite the censorship that we face, despite the mass control of the information that we share. People are still seeing images coming out of occupied Palestine, and it is moving their hearts. And so I'd love to get your comments on this exchange.
It's no surprise. It's kind of just confirms that, it just confirms what's otherwise obvious, including that the chief sponsor, I think a Republican from Wisconsin, I don't remember his name, of the TikTok sale bill, his biggest donor is AIPAC. And it tells you why this bill that was percolating along for years and really not going anywhere, all of a sudden everyone was in lockstep for this bill because the genocide was mobilizing the American public. So it's very obvious. And I have to say, this is just like the latest assault against our democracy. Our other social media platforms are already censored by security state entities covertly working with the billionaire owners. So social media is quite censored. You have legacy media, which has been consolidated into corporate America, and where there used to be many diverse voices in print media, somewhat online as well, but those have been consolidated into just a handful of corporations. And the schools of journalism now are very focused on careerism, on how you develop your career pathway. And it's all about being a lapdog rather than being a watchdog. So, and then you've got Julian Assange and Edward Snowden silenced. So our press has become the O press, shall we say. They've become part of the O press, instead of being the real press, which is what we need if we are to have a fighting chance here and to have an educated electorate that can make decisions. And then you've got Cop City and this merger of the Israeli occupation forces with our police forces. And Cop City is not the only one. And by the way, Cop City is happening under Democrats, under the Democratic City Council in Atlanta. But there are about 70 other Cop cities that are in the construction stages or the planning stages around the country. So this is not an isolated thing. That's why, I think it's important to call out fascism, as we don't have to wait for Donald Trump for fascism. Fascism is here. It's alive and well. And there's no greater trademark of fascism than conducting genocide, which we have Joe Biden to thank for. So let me just say that I think what is happening with TikTok, it needs to be fought, and hopefully we can prevent this takeover. And I know that there is a court action that has been undertaken by TikTok already. I just saw something about that today. You may know more about it than me, but it's not going down without a fight. And I think young people aren't going to let it go without a fight, because communications, it's like the public forum for young people. We need to bring back that public forum, and it shouldn't just be TikTok. It should be really all of our social media that should be managed as public utilities and not as the plaything of billionaires, where the security state gets to call the shots from behind closed doors. So, I really see our democracy on life support right now. Look at money in politics, how it's just totally gone ballistic now. Much of this was with Citizens United, but it was long in coming even before that. Our campaign has a whole agenda for basically, restoring the democratic process. Not that it was ever in great shape, but it was certainly much better than it is now. And the American people want to get money out of politics. We want to have choices in our elections. We want to end the fear mongering and the extortion that takes place as a matter of routine. We want to be able to vote for who we want, and there's this thing called ranked choice voting, which is being adopted really all over the country. It should be adopted on a national scale. It lets you rank your choices. It assures you that you can go ahead and vote for an underdog, number one. If your number one loses and nobody has a majority, your vote's automatically reassigned to your number two. It makes this kind of spoiler fear absolutely obsolete, which is why the Democrats try to destroy this wherever they can, because they rely on extorting your vote, because they can't earn your vote. And we have a saying for that, which is that no candidate owns your vote. They have to earn your vote. And if they tell you that they are entitled to your vote, then they have eliminated themselves really from consideration to start with. Anybody who tells you that they own your vote. What's happening in TikTok, I think, is a really important battle and part of a much larger battle that we are fighting full bore.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. And I appreciate that you brought up Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. I think you're probably the only presidential candidate who has the courage to mention both of their names, at least not without calling them a terrorist or something shortly after. What would you do to dismantle the CIA, the NSA, and shut down the surveillance state apparatus exposed by both Julian and Edward Snowden?
That's, I don't have a quick and ready answer for that, but I'll answer it more generally, which is to say that we badly need to dismantle empire, and the security agencies are very much a part of this. The CIA, for example, has been the vehicle for overthrowing some 70 governments around the world. One very important tool that I think we can bring back right away are congressional hearings and a church type committee to clarify exactly what these agencies are doing and which one needs to be eliminated first. but in the meantime, there's a lot that we can do to either, unfund them. They get lots of
I can
money
help you
from
out right now.
channels.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
have a list.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it goes CIA, NSA, although they definitely fight for 1 and 2. Then DEA,
ICE.
ICE as well, of course.
ICE
Yeah,
has got to
so
go.
yeah, pretty much any
Yeah.
of those, I would say, could go immediately.
I like it.
Save you the hearings.
People say, oh, it's very complicated. Actually, it's not very complicated. It's really about international law, which has been asserted over and over again in the United Nations. Step one is stop all the weapons, all the military support, really exert a massive boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel to shut down the genocide. That needs to happen like now, immediately, especially in light of the invasion of Rafah. It's like this is where they've been going. They have herded Palestinians like cattle into this little bottom southern corner of Gaza. This is like the final culminating chapter in displacement, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. And now they're being shot at like fish in a barrel. This is just utterly appalling and disastrous. And if there's ever been a time to really pull out all the stops, I think it's now. It's now that aid should be cut off. And the countries of the world, I think, need to put an end to this. We in this country need to put an end to it and can put an end to it. And that's one final comment I want to make. Maybe it's not final, but I do want to throw in that we're seeing this movement sweep across campuses, despite all the military might that's being thrown at it and the power of the administrations. Some of them are thoughtful, some of them are totally not, and are very
Over
bought into.
2,200 students have been arrested in the last couple of weeks in the U.S.
Exactly. And it's only growing, and they are not going away. It is spreading to be international now as well. So young people are not going to be stopped. In addition, look at what just happened to Starbucks. And this is the product of the anti-genocide movement. And it's not going to stop with Starbucks. So now this is not only a very powerful movement among youth, this is also a movement with real economic power. And that is very clear now. So it's important to recognize that the power of this movement is unstoppable. It's absolutely unstoppable. And I think this is a time to stand up and really insist that support for Israel stops now, and to occupation and ethnic cleansing and genocide. It's got to stop.
You mentioned about the genocide happening in Rafah, Palestine, and they spent International Holocaust Remembrance Day committing genocide in Rafah. The Zionists did. That's how they commemorated the Holocaust, which has been so heavily weaponized. And I'm speaking about it as somebody who lost family in the Holocaust, other family left during pogroms. I've seen the way that they have tragedy pimped our trauma in order to justify their genocide.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no,
yeah.
that's really powerful. And we see tragedy being pimped, to use your words, all over the place, and on college campuses as well, where suddenly you can't debate the genocide being committed by the apartheid state of Israel. You can't mention that. That's like, bordering illegal.
And it's also deeply inconsistent with the actual reality on the ground, but also the consensus of the international community. When you look at the UN, for example, it's always the US against everybody else in the General Assembly in order to protect Israel, to shield Israel, from any accountability. Obviously, we know that the US has exercised its veto power in the Security Council over 45 times in the last several decades to shield Israel from accountability for its violations of international law vis-a-vis the Palestinian people. What the students are asking for is so obvious and sensible, right? Disclose and divest. Just tell us what you're doing with our money. We pay you, we pay you in some cases like over $100,000 to get this education, right?
It's
and
$1 million, if not multi-billion-dollar industry. Higher education, like, where's the money going? The fuck?
It's such a sensible proposal. Just tell us what you're doing with the money. Columbia has, I believe, over an $8 billion endowment. Harvard's endowment is somewhere around $50 billion. These universities are essentially functioning as investment funds, and they do teaching as marketing, right? That the fact that they issue
They're
degrees
hedge
is
funds who pretend to be colleges.
yes, that's what they do, because they literally have the amount of money that they have to invest is in competition with the major investment firms, right?
Hey, every
So
single one of their classes is an acting class because they are acting like a college.
yes, exactly.
And
so yeah,
adding to that, the ruling of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, was that it is incumbent on all of us to do everything in our power to stop this genocide. So what the students are asking for, has been legitimized by the highest court of the land, by the United Nations, and by the majority of the American people. So it's just shocking and pathetic and ridiculous that the powers that be are trying to make this out to be some kind of a terrorist enclave, that the tender minds of our college students are being corrupted by some Hamas conspiracy. It's such a
it's so
sad,
insulting. It's so
We've-
insulting to intelligence.
We've heard the talking points.
It
We're
is
good.
Yeah,
insulting.
it's so insulting to intelligence. And I was just going to add to that one more point. Months ago, the UN Human Rights Council declared that all weapons transfers from anywhere in the world should cease to Israel.
Wow. Oh,
Right.
that's a
And
very
barely
good
anybody knows this. It's gotten no
Yes.
press. You'd think that the media would be interested in this because, I don't know, it seems kind of relevant. But what they managed to do is, if they don't completely distort the messaging of a movement or somebody's position, they just ignore it entirely so as to erase it from existence. And so I keep reminding of these things because I think they're essential to understand. Again, what the students are asking for is entirely sensible. Divestment from weapons manufacturers, from the companies that literally make money off of mass killing. It's
Totally.
not a crazy idea. It's even like in line with some actually very mainstream ideas right now in the field of business and human rights.
Mhm.
And responsible investing and ESG principles and all this stuff. Like this is not this radical position.
It's in line with documents inside of the State Department's own recommendations.
That's right. Yes.
We all saw the ProPublica report, right? And we talked about it extensively on the
What
pod. So I'm not-
absolute radicals they are at the State Department. I mean, truly, it's everywhere's been captured.
And to close the circle here, this is why, to my mind, this is such a powerful moment right now for us to seize the moment, in this perfect political storm for a transformative change. And that's why we have to be on the ballot across the country. But that battle line is drawn in New York State. So again, I want to just appeal to everyone, because this is where the American people are. Students are leading us according to our highest values and to really what the future looks like. This is a no-brainer. The American people are already signed on. It's just our power structure that is trying to stifle dissent and to suppress it. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That demand needs to be in this election. And one last quote from Alice Walker, that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have the numbers here. We also have the economic power, which is now suddenly emerging full blown for people to see that this is not only what's happening to Starbucks, but also apparently McDonald's is having some economic insecurities right now. So this is a really powerful and unstoppable movement. We need to assert this movement in our politics and inject it into our politics. Forget the lesser evil. Fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We can create an America and a world that works for all of us. Don't believe them when they tell you it can't. They're just trying to cling to their last vestiges of power. But this is an empire whose days are numbered. We just have to stand up and make it so.
And to the naysayers, greater empires have fallen and the future is not written. And whenever we look back in history and see great moments of social change, there's always been people that risked something, that took a chance, that mobilized, that organized together and said, we're just not going to accept this reality. And I think most people in the world have decided that they're not going to accept genocide as a status quo, as inevitable, as something that is just, what the Zionists say. They say war is hell. Anytime you tell them anything, you show them anything, about children being massacred while they're sleeping. And they say war is hell. That's just what it is. No, that's not actually what it is. And people see that. Dr. Gabor Mate has spoken about the difference between what the hearts see and the minds are being told. And people are just not falling for it anymore. They've seen the images and they know what's real. And so I encourage everyone listening to support Dr. Jill Stein, follow her, give her your vote in November. Consider this an endorsement from my part. I have never endorsed a political candidate. Not that my endorsement matters. I'm not a celebrity or anything, but I never have. And this is a hugely impactful and meaningful moment for me as well, because I actually lost all hope in the American political process. I just, as a Palestinian American, both sides have always been absolutely horrible to my people. It has never mattered whether a Democrat was in office, because the oppression of the Palestinian people has never ceased for one day, and the U.S. role in perpetuating that oppression has never ceased for one day. But you are offering a very refreshing vision, not just for U.S. foreign policy, but an entirely different approach that respects humanity, that respects the environment, and that is targeting so many of the ills of our current structure and world. And I think it's really a culmination of so many movements.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I mean, it means the world to me to hear your perspective and your support, and I can't thank you enough for that. And I want to share one final thought, which is, again, what a perfect storm this is, and not let them talk you down in terms of our expectations. I think we need to aim for taking over the system here, take it over from the war profiteers, and from Wall Street, because this could actually happen. We could put an end to genocide and start building a world that works for all of us. We could actually do this.
Dr. Jill Stein, incredible to speak with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I actually have a few more questions about Drake and Kendrick, if that's it. No, I'm just kidding. Just a little joke.
I was like, she has to go.
Of course, obviously. Thank you for coming on the show. We so appreciate
We're
you.
so appreciative.
Likewise. Thank you so much for all.
And anything we can do to help, we're here.
Thank you. All right, we'll be in touch.
Folks, that's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at the Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com, and look for us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can. Sorry, just a moment while we figure this out, Dr. Stein.
No worries. Could I be screwing it up by...
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I wouldn't think
it's that third-party candidacy. No, I'm just kidding. A little joke.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.